Jaskin Corley agus Boyle and Foster File to Hurrivan Dell, to the First Minister Michelle O'Neill and our MPs from the North who were elected to represent their constituencies, and I look forward to the day where they can rightfully take their seat in this House in a new and united Ireland. And in between, I would encourage the Government to revisit the commitment given by former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern in terms of providing speaking rights to those elected from the North. Jaskin Corley, the Charlie O'Heo la blocked in the lockdag Fullinch agus Yevni and Cora agus Adalshi and Ditch either in Tardaina agus in Tara Tihiak and Maidsaw a vis of you goni Shishin Guru and Rialtas Getty Kulu Horror and Majdini Vabalte Takiartel agus Na Rosha their foil Kate Van Gate Kuchu. The homeowners with defective concrete block scandal have continued to struggle with the failing redress scheme announced by this government since 2021. The scheme that failed to provide 100% redress as homeowners and their families face financial stress, they face mental anguish while they watch their homes crumble right around them. Children, Taoiseach, are forced to sleep in bedrooms with crumbling walls. Families are forced to live in unsafe conditions, and homeowners are facing massive shortfalls to rebuild their homes and their lives. Correspondence that's been released by the Ditch between the Attorney-General and the Minister for Housing from September 2021 reveals what Sinn Féin and the campaigners suspected from the very beginning, that there was a concerted effort at the very heart of government to block and limit financial support for those homeowners as their homes and lives crumbled right before their very eyes. The contents of the Attorney-General's letter to the Minister for Housing are shocking. The unwavering focus on ways to reduce the number of applicants to the redress scheme, and it shows the fact that he talked about that any improvements would likely increase the number of applicants to the scheme. An insinuation that affected homeowners would, in the Attorney-General's words, pitch their claims at the most generous basis that can be credibly advanced, end of quote. Rather than recognising that these are victims of a crisis where they are facing financial ruin and hardship and only ever wanted fairness, only ever wanted justice, only ever wanted a safe home for themselves and their children. The Attorney-General, in his correspondence, calls into question the competence of certified engineers, questioning their expertise and even claiming that they would be susceptible to pressure from homeowners and recommend anything other than was right or that they would be professionally recommending. He also questioned the expertise of local authority staff. The contents of this correspondence are shocking, with the Attorney-General providing not just legal advice but policy advice on an issue that has destroyed so many lives. The Government has accepted much of the advice which limited financial support to so many homeowners. The disastrous consequences of this decision, Taoiseach, are only too well known by the victims of this scandal. Only 61 properties have been fully remediated to date, and that includes under the old scheme that was announced in 2018. The failures of the Government in responding to the defect scandal aren't surprising. The owners of nearly 16,000 apartments with emergency fire safety defects have yet to receive state funding despite the scheme opening since last year. And legislation meant to underpin a wider redress scheme for people with Celtic Tiger era defects has still not been published despite commitments that it would be published last September. Your Government has failed homeowners affected by the defective concrete block scandal. The financial distress, but also the mental anguish that they face each and every day is proof of that failure. Taoiseach, the Attorney-General said in his advice that it was important to urgently engage with local solicitors to pursue the wrongdoers. In his advice, he mentioned quarries and block manufacturers. He said that there was considerable urgency with this. He went on to name Cassidy's quarry in Donegal, and he made it clear that the company going into liquidation could still be pursued and a claim made against them or their insurers. So can I ask you very simply, Taoiseach, on behalf of what 7,000 affected homeowners that's got concrete defects, can I ask you, why do you accept the Attorney-General's advice when it comes to actually limiting their ability to access this, but ignored the Attorney-General's advice when he told you now to urgently pursue the wrongdoers and naming some of those companies who were the wrongdoers, and you have done nothing about that since?
Michelle O'Neill agus Buil Parliament na Bretainine chuig ar dig. Ní ein tíim leis an méid atá ráite ag Pearse Doherty, mar is sa léir go bhfuil annach chuid inistíoch chur ar fáil ag an rialtas ó thaobh óníorí tuige nó taglaigh ina bhfuil annach chuid damáiste déanta de asca maice tá suas le gá bilún go leith inis chur ar fáil ag an rialtas don scéim seo. Agus scéim a bhad níos fearr ná an scéim a bhí ann henne 2009 agus scéimh ina raibh sin féin sásta le. Bhí siar sásta leis an scéim a bhí ann 2008 agus 2009. I just want to say I disagree fundamentally with the Deputy's presentation. Legal advice is always given to government on a whole range of issues. But the fundamental reality is, and I would have met with the representatives of micro-owners at the time as Taoiseach, and we dealt with many of the issues that they raised with us in respect of the deficiencies of the 218-219 scheme. And Sinn Féin supported and acquiesced with that 218-219 scheme, and Deputy O'Loughlin is on the record as saying that that scheme would suffice. But of course, it wasn't satisfactory, and that's why the government acted in terms of dramatically changing and transforming that schemes. And the enhanced scheme, which was legislated for in June of 2023, provide financial support to affected homeowners in Donegal, in Mayo, Limerick and Clare, and additionally now Sligo has been added, and grants of up to 420,000 are available for affected homeowners depending on the works required under the scheme, and transitional arrangements for the transfer of applicants from the current scheme to the new, or the older scheme to the new scheme were also provided. And the enhanced scheme provides an evidence-based system for new counties or parts of counties to be designated as required. And you know, there's a lot of research and an extraordinary lot of work. And a report on the first 6 months of the operation of the scheme was recently prepared for the Minister. And it concluded that within the legislative framework set down by the Oireachtas, the scheme was operating satisfactorily. And indeed, the new scheme provides very substantial enhancements. 100% grants subject to an overall maximum grant of 420,000 per dwelling. Grant rates in keeping with advice from the Society of Chartered Surveyors. Government guarantee in the form of a second grant option if required for a period of up to 40 years. That wasn't in the previous scheme that Deputy O'Loughlin was happy with. A revised application process which removes the financial barrier to scheme entry, an independent appeals process for applicants, alternative accommodation and storage costs and immediate repair works to a maximum value of 25,000, which people had asked for. The expertise of the housing agency in assessing applications. The inclusion of RTB registered rental properties, which hadn't been in the older scheme. The inclusion, as I said, of Clare and Limerick in the enhanced scheme upon commencement, and exempt development status for remediation works completed under the scheme. And the scheme is estimated, the costs are estimated at 2.3 billion. So I don't know how the Deputy can say the focus has been on limiting financial allocation to the scheme when the costs are estimated at about 2.3 billion, which by any objective yardstick is a very significant response by the government, and quite a significant number of applications. Up to the combined total amount paid to local authorities today is about 49.3 million, and about 1,644 applications had been received in the older scheme. They've transitioned to the new scheme, plus a further 514, and 821 of those were referred to the Housing Finance Agency.
Taoiseach, homeowners are telling you that the scheme isn't working. That's the nuts and bolts of this here. Everybody can tell you this. 1,300 people turned up in Inishowen telling us that the scheme wasn't working. 500 turned up in Mayo telling us the scheme wasn't working. The scheme is not working. It locks people out. And see this Attorney General's advice. I have it here. His advice was very clearly aimed at keeping people out of the scheme, trying to limit the exposure. And tell me this, Taoiseach, how is it legal advice for the Attorney General to call into question the competence of certified engineers? How is it legal advice for the Attorney General to call into competence the staff that we have working in our local authorities in Donegal or elsewhere? Riddle me that. The Attorney General wasn't given legal advice in a lot of this, it was actually policy advice. But where he did give legal advice in this chapter, chapter 23 of his legal advice, he says, I believe it's important to urgently engage competent local solicitors. He goes on to say, in terms of quarries, block manufacturers, he says there's considerable urgency with this because for any claims that are not statute barred, it would be necessary to issue proceedings urgently to avoid them being statute barred. He goes on to say, talk about Cassidy's quarries. He questions whether they're attempting to avoid liability by going into liquidation, but he says that even if they do go into liquidation, you can still pursue them. Now, I put it to you, 3 years on, Taoiseach, you have locked thousands of people out of this scheme, but 3 years on, what have you done to pursue the wrongdoers, the block manufacturers, the quarry manufacturers, that the Attorney General told you 3 years ago to urgently pursue?
We're over time. You're over time. No, please, we're going to have to comply with the I don't mind a little leniency, but we're going to comply with the rules. Okay, Thomas.
First of all, we have locked nobody out of the scheme. And what I would say to the Deputy opposite, Sinn Féin and Deputy McLaughlin in particular gave, I admit, a cautious welcome to the previous scheme in January 2020, which compares in no shape or form to the new scheme that this government introduced, which is far more comprehensive, far more expansive, which deals with all of the issues that were raised with me when I first met with the group. And the policy response has been a very generous one, and there has to be an evidence-based approach to it, and the Society of Chartered Surveyors were brought in to look at the costs, all of the implications, and to make provision. I don't think there's a jurisdiction anywhere in Europe would have responded in the manner that we have responded here as a government. And also we've created further additionality in terms of the retrofit schemes and the SEAI, in terms of in any new remediation, the retrofitting facility is now available, which is additional again in terms of the scheme. So I deny, and I would reject, the assertions from Sinn Féin. And look, you haven't been on the ball on this for quite a long time. You never, for example, you've never replied. You never replied to a written request 2 months after the working group report was published. You never replied for some reason, giving your own detailed position on how the scheme. I think you guys dropped the ball a bit, you know.
Too embarrassed to even address the question.
Deputy O'Brien, I will not proceed in this manner. We're going to treat each other with dignity and respect. And listen, Deputy, I'm not going to repeat it. We're going to move on. Deputy Holly Cairns. Can we deal with the next speaker and listen, please? Thank you. Deputy Holly Cairns. Deputy Lawless.
I've asked the question twice. Not pursue the wrongdoers.
I can tell you.
I've asked the question twice.
Deputies, if this continues, I'm going to actually stop the dawn.
Apologies,
no, the apologies are not helpful at this point. We're going to move on with dignity and respect and listen to each other. Deputy Holland Care.